We're live.
Are we ready to show?
Rolling.
Let's do this thing. Consider, if you will, a man. A man with erudite manner and anachronistic bent. This is a fellow who lives out of step with the mainstream of society, out of sync by 55 years. Is he on a galactic journey, or is he a traveler through the Twilight Zone? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I don't actually smoke, but this edition of Galactic Journey brought to you by Rally Cigarettes. That smooth, cool flavor. For those of you who don't know, when the Twilight Zone ends, Rod Serling always comes out and advertises the brand of cigarettes, and it changes every season, which makes me think he might actually be paid to advertise his cigarettes. All right, so you're probably wondering, who is this guy? Why is he dressed up, and why is he wearing an all the way with LBJ pin? And what is he doing at a fan convention? So the answer is, my name is Gideon Marcus, and I run the place called Galactic Journey, galacticjourney.org. And what we are is a time machine to exactly 55 years ago. And the great thing about it is everybody can join in. And people do, believe me. We started out with one person, now we've got 20 people. We're like a snowball. So the idea is we are a bunch of people writing about 55 years ago as if it's today. So right now it is September 14th, 1964. Now I've done these panels at a zillion conventions, from Worldcon to Comic-Con to everywhere else. And now I'm very happy to be doing this at Fangaea. Let me tell you how these things go, because this is a very audience participation thing. And you want to stay to the end, because you might win a prize. Here's how it works. I come from 1964. You can tell. See, narrow lapels and narrow tie. There are people out there who have narrow lapels and fat ties. They are wrong. I forgive them, but they're wrong. But since I live in 1964, and apparently you don't, because you're all wearing very fabulous things that I don't recognize. Although some of you look like you might be part of that new wave of animation coming out of Japan. Is that possible? We'll be talking about that a little bit. So I'm going to give you like a 5 to 10 minute primer on what's happening right now in September 1964. And then I'm going to open it up to the audience. And you guys can ask me anything you want. And I never know where these panels are going to go. And whoever asks the best questions wins a prize. Who's seen one of my panels before? And you came back, see? That's a testament. You too, you definitely want to come in here. This is the place you want to be. All right, so what's happening? So 1964 is a very tumultuous year. As you know, last year, November 22nd, our president was cut down in the prime of his life by a shooter in Dallas, who 2 days later was cut down by another shooter in Dallas. It's a crazy time. Does everyone know who our president is right now? No. Are you all Russians? Yeah. President Johnson, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson is our president right now. And he's been doing the best job he can, building what's called the Great Society, helping elevate people from poor conditions, especially in Appalachia. Probably, but this is 1964, almost everybody is. He asked if he was a racist. The answer is probably, but he championed the Civil Rights Bill, which came out just a couple of months ago, and it's hard to imagine anyone else but him doing it. Last month, the North Vietnamese attacked our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, and we've begun our proportionate response by bombing the heck out of them. I'm sure this is a war that will go well and will be over very quickly. As you know, there's been riots in all the major cities, but they've died down lately because people are tired of being stuck in the hot cities and living with inferior conditions. Last week, the news was Hurricane Dora was heading towards the Florida coast, causing devastating damage. I want to reassure you, Alabama was never in any danger from this hurricane, whatever you might have heard. So that's what's happening in politics. What's happening? Music right now, you can't get away from the Beatles. In fact, you can't get away from them at all. They are in America right now. You can't hear them if you go to their concerts because the little girls are screaming their heads off. Even the Beatles are getting tired of it. Has anyone seen the Beatles in concert? Wow. Really are Russians. Dobry день, товарищи. Him. Okay. Now, what's happening in fandom? Because that's why you're here, right? This is a fan convention. And conventions have been going on since the 30s, so they're nothing new now. So right now we've got a fall season of television coming out. Has anyone been to England lately? Does anyone know about the science fiction show that's been really, really big right now across the pond? Anyone know? It's a Dr. something or other, Dr. Which, Dr. what?
I think it's
Yeah, no, that's what I'm asking you.
physician class.
Oh, great. So this guy's obviously been across the ocean because you can't watch Doctor Who unless you live in England because they don't show it in the United States. However, luckily we have we have a correspondent in England who covers Doctor Who as it comes out, and it is worth reading her articles because they are hysterical. If you never get a chance to watch Doctor Who, this might even be better because I understand the Doctor fluffs all of his lines because he's an old actor. You know, people get old. That's okay. I won't, but he does.
This is our one of our two British correspondents, Jessica Holmes, and she covers every episode of Doctor Who as it comes out. Usually in batches because the way Doctor Who is arranged is, I understand, in serials.
Right. So the season 1 just ended. We understood it was supposed to be an educational program, but it's veered into science fiction and time travel. And why don't you show some pictures? So it's going to be renewed apparently. So if it ever comes to America in syndication like Danger Man and the Marionation shows, then that'll be something worth watching. In America, have you guys heard about the Addams Family? How about the Munsters? Is that familiar to anybody? There's a show called Bewitched.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. There's 3 supernatural themed sitcoms coming out this year in the same season within like a week or two of each other. And I've never seen such a thing on television before. We've been drowning in westerns, and we have so many family themed sitcoms. Andy Griffith, Dennis the Menace.
If you want to hear about what we're watching on TV.
So part of the reason I started with Rod Serling is the 5-year run of The Twilight Zone just ended. How many people have seen The Twilight Zone? All right. Okay, you're not all Russians. Great. So that was a great show, but it's over now. So the question is, what science fiction is going to replace it? The Outer Limits, I understand, is going to be canceled in 6 months. So I have no idea what's coming next. It's like we're lost in space or something. I don't know what's coming next. What are some other interesting shows that are coming out this season? Johnny Quest. Has anyone seen Johnny Quest? It's a cartoon. It's a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Same guys who do the Jetsons and the Flintstones are going to be doing this cartoon called Johnny Quest.
Here it is. Johnny Quest. So
And
the animation for a Hanna-Barbera production, the animation is quite different.
Yeah, why don't you go down to the next picture? Well, I want to show you just how politically correct this show is. It is an incredibly sensitive portrayal of the various diverse cultures that make up our world, this show. If you get a chance, it's really progressive in its portrayal. Anyway.
Well, no worse than any other show that was coming out that time. Not to excuse it, but seriously, the art is quite impressive, and I understand they got an actual comic book artist to do the art for it. So
it's like watching the comic books on TV. It's pretty neat. Anyone read science fiction books, literature, magazines of the time? They just had WorldCon. That's the World Science Fiction Convention. It's been a phenomenon that happens every year since 1939, and they honor the best science fiction authors, or in this case, the best science fiction that the people happen to nominate, not necessarily the best science fiction that the world has to offer. The convention happened in the Bay Area, and there was a bit of a civil war that happened in the WorldCon this year, so fandom is split in two. Because there's a fellow named Walter Breen. I see someone nodding their head. They may have heard of this before. Walter Breen has an unsavory habit. Now, I know science fiction fans are weird. We're a big tent, big umbrella. We let anybody in. But who here would draw the line at child molesters?
oof.
That's at least one. Right. So this Walter Breen is a very famous fan. He's also one of the big names in coin collecting. And he's also a child molester. And this year, the WorldCon committee said, we are not going to allow Walter Breen in our convention. And amazingly, this is a controversial item in 1964. And half the people boycotted WorldCon. There was almost fighting at the convention. It was amazing. I did not go to the convention this year. We were supposed to be on the ballot this year, Best Fanzine. For some reason, we were not on the ballot in 1964, and I don't know how that happened. So if you tried to vote for us in 1964, I'm sorry. Maybe they'll give you your $3 back for attending the convention. So I am happy to talk to you about anything. Whatever you want to know about 1964, you ask the question, I will go where you take me. So let's raise it to questions on the floor. Don't be, she's raising her hand.
So you were mentioning all of the different science fiction shows coming out. Which one just seems most promising to you right now?
Well, interestingly enough, the one that seems most promising to me isn't in the fall lineup. There's a fellow named Gene Roddenberry. He came out with a show last year called The Lieutenant, which was neat. It's a Marine show, takes place at Camp Pendleton, so it's a local show. Starred a guy named Gary Lockwood. Gene Roddenberry is writing the pilot for a show that's going to be kind of an anthology show, but it's going to involve a starship with the same crew every single week, and they'll go to planets all over the place. It's kind of like Forbidden Planet or something. It's called Star something or other.
Star Voyage or something like that.
Right, Star Voyage. Anyway, he's making the pilot for that right as we speak. If we see it, it'll be out probably next season. I'm really looking forward to that show, because we've had kind of a dearth of good science fiction on television for quite a long time.
Well, I mean, we had Twilight Zone.
Right.
But most science fiction that we've seen has been either more oriented to children. We have the puppet animation shows.
Oh yeah, anyone seen Supercar?
Supercar, Fireball XL5 by the same people. We covered some of those.
So it stars people who move around, they're little puppets.
Yeah, they're little.
They do their best not to show them walking because it looks really bad.
Marionation, I think.
Marionation, yeah. Jerry Anderson and his wife.
And then, of course, shows like Johnny Quest. The Twilight Zone was really a breakout new kind of show where anthology shows were nothing new, but one with such a heavy emphasis on science fiction was really new. And I think that's going to open the door to more adult-oriented science fiction as time goes on. It's really exciting.
Are there any comic book fans in the room? So as you know, there are two big comic producers, right? You have Marvel Comics, which used to be Atlas Comics, and you have National. Anyone know who National is? They're better known as DC. They do Batman and other hokey stuff like that. Both of them, of course, are coming out with tons of new stars, like every single day. So, for instance, Marvel has got a blind superhero named Daredevil. They've got the bickering people, the Fantastic Four. And then, of course, DC's got its own thing. You guys are familiar with the group of mutant children who are ostracized from society, and they're led by a bald fellow or an old fellow in a wheelchair. You guys know what I'm talking about? Doom Patrol? Yes. So comics are really exciting right now. The Amazing Spider-Man, Thor, the Avengers. Maybe, I don't know, in 55 years these names will probably all be forgotten. But right now, these are really big names. Who knows, maybe in 55 years, DC will be coming out with movies based on their properties that are really amazing and much better than Marvel. Right? I could totally predict the future. That's one of my powers.
So I actually want to go back to something you were talking about before, is what's coming out of Japan, because recently we not only cover shows and books and fashion and architecture, but we also cover movies. And one coming out that came out just recently, we went to Japan to see it, was Mothra versus Godzilla. And it has so far been the best of the giant monster movies. I covered it on the blog. And
On the what?
On the fanzine.
On the column?
Yeah, on the column.
She
Right.
has her own column.
I have no idea what that word blog means, but it sounds somewhat vulgar, and there are children in the audience.
But yeah, that was, I will admit that I really fell in love with Mothra in that movie.
Do you want to recreate one of the great scenes from that movie?
Which one?
Any of the scenes. I'll be Godzilla, you can be Mothra. Are there any people who are fans of giant monster movies coming out of Japan? What's your favorite character coming out of Japan? Is it Godzilla? Is it Mothra? Is it Rodan?
One with the 3 heads.
One with the 3 heads. So that movie, you sir, obviously have a line on pre-production, because I have seen the concept art for Ghidorah, but that's a movie that won't come out until next year. So you, sir, I need to find out what your sources are, because you are really clued in. We have covered every Godzilla movie since they started coming out in 1954. So, there you go.
There's Godzilla versus this was the movie poster.
Yeah, that's an authentic movie poster with an authentic That is an authentic reaction to that poster. It's actually a really good movie.
Yeah, and the review is quite good too, if you want to see the young traveler's take on it. It's funny and well worth a read.
The other thing that's coming out of Japan is this new genre. It's so new it doesn't even have a name yet. It's some kind of animation.
Well, it's animation like.
Right,
Not
but at some
dissimilar
point it
to-
should have a distinctive name. I don't know what it's going to be called, but something with animation would probably make sense. But it just started coming out last year, and it's made a huge impact on society. So there was a show called Mighty Atom. Has anyone seen Mighty Atom?
That's the one that's in the original.
Yeah, I think it's called Astro Boy in the United States. So that's a show that came out in Japan, and 6 months later came out in America, and it's on American TV right now. And it's a remarkably sophisticated cartoon. It only has like 2 frames of animation per second, but the concepts are very interesting with robots finding their place in society. There's more shows coming out like Tetsujin Nihachigo, Iron Man 28, Big X. These cartoons are fascinating because they're very different from American cartoons. They're designed for a wider audience. They come from what the Japanese call manga, which is their comic book tradition that came out of World War II. It's my understanding that there's just going to be this wave of cartoons coming out in Japan, and they're coming out in the United States just a few months later, just like stuff is coming from England to America. It's a very exciting time to be alive. Do you think some point there will be enough interest in this new genre to maybe have conventions devoted to this animation?
I don't know. I mean, a whole convention just devoted to this niche item from overseas? That sounds pretty
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm a big fan. I go to Japan almost every year. On you know, the new jets, the Boeing 707s and the Douglas DC-9s. Those are great. You don't have to stop in Honolulu anymore. It's a straight shot from San Francisco to Tokyo. Oh, the Olympics are happening in Japan.
in October.
Next month, yeah.
Yeah.
We missed that.
Yeah, they're doing Summer Olympics, but it was so hot they moved them to October.
So is anyone going to the Olympics in Japan, in Tokyo? Because they're coming soon, right? Everyone knew about the Olympics in Tokyo coming soon, right? Some people ask me why I chose 55 years. That hasn't come up yet. But the reason why I do 55 years is because there's something about exactly 55 years from now where everything feels like today, just a little crappier, right? It's totally recognizable as our world. All the pop culture is the same, the politics are similar, and yet it's this weird reflection of today's world. It's just been fascinating. Like I said, you had a hurricane in 2019, I understand, called Dorian, came at the same time to the same place. I understand you have an interesting president. Speaking of interesting presidents, so the 1964 campaign is heating up, right? Because as you know, after Labor Day is when the presidential campaign heats up, and those 8 weeks are pretty much the only time that we talk about the president, those 8 weeks.
Yeah.
God help us if it expands how long we're talking about presidents in the future. I hope not. But as you can see, I'm unashamedly wearing my Johnson button. Are there any Goldwater supporters in the room? Right, the door's right there, sir. Yeah, Goldwater is a nativist. He's anti-involvement in other countries. He's anti-immigration. He's a bit of a warmonger. And his politics. Ronald Reagan, have you guys seen Ronald Reagan? He used to be a Democrat. Now he's stumping for Barry Goldwater. I think he wants to run for president sometime. God help us.
Oh, come on.
All right, sorry, I've talked too much. Questions? Somebody raise a hand. Who wants to know about that? Oh, you.
Like when you time travel, do you ever partake in the culture? Or do you just come and then you tell people about what life was like where you were from?
So that's a very interesting thing you asked that. I live in 1964. My house is this weird bubble of time. If you get within 100 feet of my house, the radio stations play 1964. When you came in, there was music playing. That's the music that plays in my house. We have a television station, Channel 9. If you turn it on, it is playing. Lisa's seen this. She can attest. We live in the past. And that's really important because it's only when you go back in time to save Kennedy or to shoot Hitler, please, if you get a chance, please shoot Hitler. When you just go back in time to see a certain event, you have this very sort of modern focus on what's happening. When you live in the past, day by day, you understand things contextually. It all makes sense in a bigger picture. So we actually live in 1964, and then the only time I come to the present is at these places so I can talk to you.
And to answer your question, we do occasionally consume modern, modern media. But a lot of our focus is on the past.
I think you also want to know what else we cover. So we started out just covering science fiction, but we realized you have to cover everything. We have a fashion columnist now. So every quarter we talk about what new fashions are coming out. We cover politics. We cover weird new music.
Did I hear say you cover architecture too? I hadn't noticed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have an article on architecture.
One of our West German correspondents. As you know, there are 2 Germanys. Is anyone who didn't know that there are 2 Germanys right now?
They just built the wall, didn't they?
A couple of years ago, right? They built a wall between West and East Berlin because people were enjoying East Berlin so everyone was trying to get into East Berlin. They had to put up a wall to keep Westerners from going into the communist world. It's terrible how many Westerners were. Actually, one of the biggest German nuclear scientists just defected to the West at a conference. That was pretty exciting. Hopefully we get some nuclear secrets from him. But yeah, Cora Bullard, our West German correspondent, did a whole article on modern architecture. So yeah, we cover everything. If you're into comics or science fiction or anything, you will find something to like. We've been doing it for 6 years, so there will be tons of articles that you like.
Right, and they cover this span of time.
I would say, so living in the past actually has its perks because sometimes you discover things that you never thought you'd like. So there's this, when I turn on the TV, and it's Channel 9, there's a show, I watch all the TV from 1964, so Mr. Ed, Andy Griffith's show, what we're talking about. There's one little gem that we found called Burke's Law, and I am sure that
You guys know this show, Burke's Law?
nobody has heard of it.
Anyone heard of Burke's Law?
So it's about a millionaire playboy who is a private, like a head of
He's the captain of the police force.
Yeah.
Homicide.
and it's a really fun show. So we've been watching it weekly and enjoying the show, and it's a real way to live in the time.
Even as a handsome young protege. It's kind of like what it would be like if, I always say it's like what Bruce Wayne would have been like if his parents hadn't been killed, but he still wanted to like make a difference in the world. This is what he might have become, this sort of feckless and lighthearted playboy who is also a dedicated police chief who solves all these cases.
Although there is one reason why they like Burke's Law that they're not telling you, because in 1964, there are certain things that are taboo. So for instance, there's this situation where people like other people of the same sex. You may have heard about this. Occasionally in places like Los Angeles, police will dress up in tight jeans and try to solicit people and then get them arrested for homosexuality. In 1964, this is a common thing that happens. So people don't talk about homosexuality. In 1961 was the first documentary on homosexuality that wasn't negative. But one of the things that makes Burke's Law interesting is Amos Burke is this handsome police captain, and he has this younger apprentice detective. And there are stories that can be written about these two people. Sick, depraved, decadent stories that involve these taboo themes. But if this is something you like, and you can put on those glasses, this is a show you might enjoy.
Well, it's fun, but the fan culture hasn't really evolved in that direction yet. That's something we'll have to wait another couple years until Star Trek comes out, and then you'll start.
And that'll be underlined with a big slash.
Yep. And then we can talk about the going to conventions and sidling up to the tables and asking if they have any fanzines of that particular type.
Yes, they're under the table where no one can see them.
Yeah.
And everybody knows what these are, right? You cannot get away from these in 1964. This is one of the drawbacks. The music is good, the food is full of fat, and gas costs 25 cents a gallon. But these are everywhere. You go into an airplane and it's just smoke, wall to wall, even in non-smoking sections, because the smoke doesn't obey the rules. So it's not all great in 1964. Also, if you happen to be a woman or a color other than white, it's also not the best time to live. Although people are marching to change that. All right, I'm talking too much again. Questions? This is for a prize. Think about what you want to know about.
A couple silly questions.
Good.
So if you're in 1964, what is she using there?
So that's an interesting question you asked. So this is something we borrowed from the future. But if this were 1964, this is what it would look like. The entire room would be filled with machinery, looking like Coke vending machines, perhaps. They would have big wheels of tape, which is where all the memory would be. They would have one giant computer bank with memory in it, which actually looks like, has anyone seen like chainmail from the Middle Ages? That's what it looks like. And each link is one bit of memory. And people would hand sew these little links. Little old ladies in Singapore would sew these links, and you would get a whopping 4 kilobytes of memory. That is a good computer. And you'd have this little thing, if you were lucky, you'd have a little thing like a typewriter called a teletype, and you would type in your commands into the computer. And then you would get the readout, maybe on a screen, but more commonly, a printer would print it out. And what's really bad is usually to give commands into a computer, you had to have this box of cards. You'd have a shoebox full of cards. And let me tell you, you have never seen angst like some poor grad student who has dropped his cards in the parking lot and has to put his program in the right order. Grown men crying, tears. I say grown men, but as we know, if you go to NASA or any other sophisticated place, who are the programmers? They are
Women.
women. That's right. Has anyone seen a movie from the future called Hidden Figures?
That actually overlaps our timeline.
So Hidden Figures is a story about the women computers. Computers used to be real people, like people who did calculations. And then when computers came out, they ended up becoming the programmers. In the early 60s, if you had a computer programmer, they were probably a woman. And the reason why was programming was women's work. Men engineers didn't sully their hands with talking to the computer. Amazing how times will change in the future.
Here's a great image of the sewing of the circuits that he was talking about. That's an advertisement from that time of how the circuits were actually sewn.
The very first video game has come out. It's called Space War. And it was invented by guys at MIT because they didn't want to work and they had this giant computer and they said, let's make a game and you can shoot at each other and it's great if you live in Massachusetts.
If you're interested in these, this is just one of the topics that we actually cover, this and the space race, but particularly computers. We have correspondents who talk about the early computers, early typewriters and various other things. You can search on various terms and learn exactly about all of these things if that's of interest of yours. And it's got some really cool stuff.
You can even play this video game if you go to this article.
Yeah.
So that was an excellent question. Make sure that she's going to win a prize.
Okay, I will make a note.
All right. Who's next?
I think she might have had a second one too.
Oh, that's right. You got 2 silly questions. Give me number 2.
Have you ever had anybody ruin your history, like tell you something about the future?
Spoilers.
What? That's not a word I know. See, it just happened. All the time. So I went to San Diego Comic Fest a few months ago, and someone was talking about this new show called Gilligan's Island. Now, I happen to know about it because it's coming out this fall, but in April, I had no idea that the guy who was Maynard G. Krebs and Dobie Gillis was going to be in this new show coming out. So, for some reason, you guys know tons of things that I don't, which is great. But if you talk to me about them, I'm not going to know anything. For instance, I am convinced that Richard Nixon will never be president of the United States. If I'm wrong, please don't let me know, because that will be very depressing. All right, next question.
Art, music, politics?
So with the ending of the Twilight Zone, do you think that sci-fi is dead?
Sci-fi. On television or in general?
Well, in television, we have like the monsters, it seems more fantasy.
I think it comes in waves, and I think it'll depend on if we get a good movie. Did anyone see The Day the Earth Caught Fire? That's another movie. The Day the Earth Caught Fire is this like low-key British disaster movie, but it's global. The Earth is heating up, and we're all going to fry. It's a really cool. If you like disaster, do I have anybody in the audience who likes disaster movies? You, sir, you like disaster? You, sir. So if you like disaster movies, this one is like the granddaddy of them all. And it's really neat because not only do we get to watch the world end in sort of that slow, contemplative British way, because the British do everything slow and contemplatively and with lots of smoking cigarettes, but it's also this amazing look at journalism in the early 60s. It takes place in a newspaper in London, and the guy who plays the chief editor was the chief editor for that newspaper. It's really a neat movie, and I just saw it because it came out recently because it takes time for things to come over. Science fiction-y type movies. Anyone familiar with James Bond?
Yeah.
So he's had a couple of movies, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and he's got a new movie coming out next month called Goldfinger. So if anyone gets to be across the pond in October, speaking of fantasies, anyone seen the show? It's about a movie. It's about this. It's like the early 1900s suffragette movie, and this like magical maid comes with. She's carrying an umbrella. She flies in, and she's a nanny for these kids.
Oh, that's the one based on the T.L. Travers book, Mary Poppins.
Right, that just came out. Has anyone seen Mary Poppins?
Yeah.
It's nothing like the book, I will tell you that. It's a good movie, but it's nothing like the book.
So that just came out. So I think what's going to happen is I think movies are going to get a big audience. Did anyone see The Time Machine?
That was a good movie, The Time Machine.
The Time Machine.
You seen, came out in 1964, The Last Man on Earth, and it's like
Yes.
inspiration for I Am Legend. That was the original one. Like,
So it actually goes back even further than that, but that's excellent. Very good, by the way. This guy's getting in there. Vince, that's a Vincent Price movie. We have covered that
I
movie.
like that movie.
Last Man on Earth is based on a Richard Matheson novel called I Am Legend.
Yeah.
Right? I Am Legend, not as snappy a title as Last Man on Earth. I'm sure they will never make a movie called I Am Legend based on it because the title's just not as snappy.
And then like 10 years later, he made you a Mega Man or whatever.
I wouldn't know, sir.
Sorry.
Are you a time traveler from 1974?
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We accept all time travelers in this room. Just understand, I'm up here and you're over. No, that's fine. All right, next question.
What's the current state of science fiction and radio drama? And anything that you would recommend?
So, interestingly enough, radio dramas have died as a medium. In fact, the last NBC radio drama went off the air last season. And the reason why is not only do we have television now, but we have color television. So have any of you seen Bonanza or The Lucy Show or The Dinah Shore Show? Sorry, I've never heard of that show, sir.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sir.
There's one coming out.
Hazel,
this season.
which is terrible, don't watch it.
Yeah, there's one coming out this season. Looks awful. It's called My Living Doll.
That's in black and white, though.
Okay, yeah.
But it has Julie Newmar in it. Anyway. I'm a pig, a man of my time. Anyway, so because technology is advanced, radio is considered passé, and basically you only tune into the radio if you want news, or if you want to listen to that rock and roll on your little transistor radio. It used to be your radios would be like this big, and you turn them on, and then they'd like take like 5 minutes to warm up because they were vacuum tubes, keeping you riveted, I can tell. And now they fit the radio. I actually like the new music. It's really good.
I was gonna ask, how do you feel about the new rock and roll music?
So I know I'm
All that
old.
R&B.
I'm an older person, and you know what they say, never trust anyone over 30. I am slightly over 30, but not that much over 30. In fact, like Jack Benny, I am 39. In fact, I've been
Yeah, just
39
like
for
Jack
many
Benny.
years.
Yeah. What, 3 years now you've been 39?
No, I just turned 39 this year, just like Jack Benny. But no, I actually really like the new music coming out. So in the early 60s, we had instrumental music. Is anyone familiar with Dick Dale? King of the Surf Guitar. He did a song called Miserlou you might have heard of. So we saw him in concert. This was great. We went to a convention, went and saw Dick Dale in concert, and then we came back the next day. We said, we just saw Dick Dale in concert, which of course anyone living in Southern California could say. And it was amazing. God help, I hope he lives another 55 years, because if you guys get a chance to see Dick Dale in concert, he's amazing. I actually really like the music that's coming out of England right now. So I don't know if you noticed, but last year, 63, they couldn't figure out what music was going to be the big thing. We had Bob Dylan doing folk music. We had this new music coming out of Detroit called Motown. We had this instrumental music. We had surf music. We had the Beach Boys. We had really syrupy, crappy stuff that's just been around for like 10 years. We have Dean Martin, everybody loves somebody sometime. He's not actually drunk, he's just really good at faking it. And there was no music that was on top. And all of a sudden, the Beatles show up. And did you see the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show? I mean, they have swept the nation. There was a point a few months ago where 7 of the top 10 songs were Beatles songs. Thankfully, I happen to like the Beatles. But there's a lot of other bands that are coming out of England which are as good, if not better. So you've got the Dave Clark 5. There's a new band called The Kinks.
Yeah, I just heard a song by them the other day.
I really got you now.
Yeah.
The Animals have the House of the Rising Sun. There's really exciting driving music coming out. And yes, while I'm older than the average teenager, a little bit, it's still really good music. And I'm pleased that America is now taking a direction, because there's just these points in American history where music gets kind of overripe. This happened in 1954 when we were listening to music and it sounded like all the standards from World War II, except just overripe and sloppy and schmaltzy. And all of a sudden this new sound came out of the South, black people playing rock and roll. You probably didn't hear any of that because, of course, they have the white radio stations and the black radio station. And you didn't hear rock and roll unless it was Pat Boone or Elvis Presley doing horrible renditions of this music. Luckily, however, you can't segregate the airwaves, and I would always tune into the black stations, which is where the good music was. Chuck Berry, yes. Chuck Berry, not only does Chuck Berry exist, but he's a legend.
Let's listen to the Moondogs radio station.
And Jimi Hendrix.
Moondogs radio station, where there was the whole thing where there was the white kid and the black kid, and he stormed the stage, and for what was that? Ohio? For rocking the whole thing. That's spoilers.
That's exciting news.
He doesn't know about it.
Before 1964.
I might have. The thing about living in 1964 is you guys in the future know everything. If you want to know something, I understand you pull out your little microcomputers. I think they're like slide rules. Has any of you seen a slide rule? A slide rule. So in 1964, this is what we have in our pockets. And it's a little too big to fit in a pocket. You actually carry it around like a pistol. In fact, I went to Comic-Con. They would not let me bring this in because they thought it was a weapon.
They tried to make it tag.
This is how you multiply. You can do what's 7 times 3, and you get an answer that's close to 20. It's
Close.
yeah, it's a marvel of technology. Every engineer in the universe has one of these at their hip. But you people have something smaller that fits in your pocket, which we could only dream of in science fiction. And I understand you use them as telephones too, which is amazing because I don't know how they fit the little dials on these telephones.
And cameras, and I have no idea where you would put the film.
Well, they're like Polaroids, the Instamatics. You like push a button.
It's expensive too, because you have to put the nickel in, you know?
Oh, okay, yeah. But you guys know everything as it happens, which is completely different. We have the newspaper every day. And in fact, the first inkling we're getting of that is the overnight news. So it used to be that we would get the news digested in the morning. And now we can see, like when the riots happened, we got this very unbiased, unbalanced view of the riots that were going on in New York, Philadelphia, Rochester, because all we saw was the cameras zooming in on people getting out of control and cops shooting people and whatever. And they missed the whole story, but that's because TV goes where it's lurid. But for the most part, we're very sectionalized. So music that'll be big in Southern California, for instance, Dick Dale was an unknown outside of Southern California for years. TV shows might be played at different times around the country. So we don't know what's going on. So this thing that you're talking about that happened with Chuck Berry, I'm sure it happened or will happen. But unfortunately, I can't consume every single piece of media that there is, though I try.
He may read the newspapers from the time to get a broad view. He even gets the Chicago Tribune.
Yeah, it's a rag. It's a conservative rag.
He reads every science fiction, he or one of the correspondents on the site will read every science fiction magazine, but even then, you can't know everything. Yeah.
Well, they're getting close. People who trip me up, they usually get a prize.
Yep,
But good question.
I've made the note.
All right, who's next?
What's your favorite album that came out in
1964. So last year, Bob Dylan's, the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan came out, and that's a seminal album. That's really good. I understand he's changing his sound to more electrical type stuff, which is weird. What is it? Album that just came out? Oh, anyone seen the first Beatles movie, Hard Day's Night? Has anyone seen that? There's a soundtrack to that. I just picked up that record. That's a good record. Yeah, there's tons of music still coming out. We have a huge collection, and we have 3 record players in our house because you have to have a hi-fi everywhere in your house. That's how you know we're sophisticated.
It's kind of hard to convey the shift. It's like everything changed when Kennedy was shot. And there was that moment before, and then everything was after that was different. And that was the time that the Beatles were coming to America shortly after that, just a few months later. And in just like a 6-month span, what you were hearing on the radio and had been hearing on the radio was suddenly completely different. The sound was different, the focus was different, and everywhere you go, Beatlemania is amazing. In Australia, we have an article from our Australian correspondent who talked about how more than 250,000 people lined the route between the Adelaide airport and the city when they were coming in, just to get a glimpse of them as they were going by. 250,000 people, 250,000 people were there just to watch them go by. It's unbelievable the kind of response they've been getting. We have never seen anything like this before.
Elvis was close.
Elvis was close.
And Elvis hates the Beatles, by the way. Elvis and Neil Sedaka hate the Beatles because their record sales have plummeted. The 1950s basically lasted from 1950 to 1963. And we're in this new era, call it the 60s. Kids are different now. You've seen Shaggy. I mean, look at this gentleman here. Look at him. His long hair and his army coat. I mean, this you'd never see him. He'd be clean cut out of high school. This is a man you would not see. But in 1964, this is becoming more and more common a sight. It is okay to have longer hair. It's okay to have some facial hair. Thank God, because I wasn't getting rid of mine for anything. We are living in different times. Thankfully, the ties are still skinny because I think that's really slick. But yeah, when people first saw the Beatles, they said, "Oh, these are girls." I mean, look at that hair.
Yeah.
But I say flaunt it while you got it, right? If you are a feminist, you've probably read Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. And she wrote a book last year all about how women are not happy just being housewives and satisfying their husband when he comes home after a long day at work. The times, they are a-changing. And speaking of resonating, can you imagine Bob Dylan resonating more at any other time but where you guys live in 2019? I mean, things are changing so much in your time that there's just these echoes from there to here.
Well, and the sort of frustration with the government, the sense that the older generation doesn't get it, doesn't understand, the feeling like of pressure building, like something's got to give. These are things that were happening and starting to happen in 1964. Vietnam is happening right now, and it has a strong resonance with today. Go listen to The Times They Are Changing and read the lyrics to that and see if it doesn't feel weirdly familiar and weirdly resonant with today.
Does anyone know who Tony Stark is? Because that already happened. So he's Iron Man. He starts. I don't know if you know his origin story, but he was captured in Vietnam, and that's where he came from.
He's a prisoner of war.
Yeah.
So we want to know what you guys are interested in. What is your area of interest? Is it science? Is it comics? Is it fashion or politics? What do you want to know about then that you're interested in from today? Art? That's a good question.
So art is in an interesting phase right now where things are abstract. There's two basic things. You've got minimalism. You've got people doing these sculptures where it's just like a cube and a sphere. Every art reduced to its very small components, minimalist components. You've also got pop art. So taking stuff that exists as mass media and encapsulating that and saying, how does this affect our society? So for instance, Roy Lichtenstein is taking comic book panels and then recreating them as art. And depending on which kind of critic you are, you will either say it's art or it's not. Andy Warhol, everyone familiar with him. He takes things like Campbell's Soup or Marilyn Monroe, and he will turn it into art. And the idea of all these things that are impinging on our consciousness, even if we don't consider it art, are really art in some way.
Right. Even the brands we interact with, the advertisements we interact with, are art in and of themselves, and that is an interesting new idea that doesn't match up with the classic idea of art as other, as this refined and rarefied thing that is not commercial in the same way.
Right. More stuff designed to appeal to your emotion in a way different. More women are getting into the field.
Music too has not just pop music, but there's definitely some really interesting experimental music going on.
Has any of you heard the theme to Doctor Who?
Yeah, you would have had to like get some. We actually got somebody to mail us a tape from England so we could listen to it.
And when we say tape, we mean it's like a reel of tape wrapped around a spoke, and you put it in a machine and it plays it. This is an amazing piece of music. It's all generated electronically. And this lady, Delia Derbyshire, arranged it. She actually had to snip the tape and like overlay these things. It took days to arrange this piece of music, and it's all done by electronic creation of sounds and then physically cut together to make this composition. And this is a very interesting new field of music now that you can record. You can make your computers make any noise you want, and then you can record it onto this tape, and then you can make it do interesting things. I cannot make heads or tails of this kind of music, but I know people who really dig it.
Yeah, in fact, one of our correspondents, Victoria Lucas, she will talk about, and I'll pull up something in a minute, she talks about some of the experimental music that's going on. Her articles tend to be a bit rarefied, but but still very interesting.
There's a band from upstate New York that had an album last year. I was curious if you know anything about Ronnie Dio and the Prophets.
Is it gospel? Is this some kind of religious music?
Doo-wop, I think.
Doo-wop. Doo-wop's out,
It's
man.
in New York. Well, the thing is, we live in California.
Yeah.
So, what's
I don't know, it
happening
sounds
in New
really
York?
square.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ronnie James, I don't know, I might listen to that once in the Black Sabbath or something, but not routinely. Nice try, sir. Nice try.
All right, we don't have much time left. So, if you got something that you're kind of maybe thinking you want to ask about, now's your chance.
Riveted. You asked about spaceships. One thing I haven't talked about at all.
That was a big topic back then.
So yeah, the space race has been going on since 1957. And 1964 is a very interesting year. There have been no human space shots in over a year.
Yeah,
So
even though Kennedy said, go ahead, you want to say it?
You want me to do my Kennedy impression?
Yes, I want you to
We'll
do
put a
Kennedy.
man on the moon and bring him back before this decade is out.
Yeah, he's gone.
He's gone. Sadly, I can't do impressions of him anymore.
But
But Bobby Kennedy sounds just like him, except more shy and his voice is higher.
so
He's more fun to do than Johnson. So, 3 years ago, he made a pledge. We're going to go to the moon.
Right.
Since then, John Glenn went around the Earth. We had Gordo Cooper be the first man to sleep before he went into space and when he got into space. And every time we go into space, the Russians beat us. We put up a man for a few days, or a few hours, they put up a man for a few days. We put up one person per day, they put up two people. They do little Russian dances in space. We put up a guy and look at this guy, we got this guy. And they're like, yes, we have a woman. So right now they're winning. Now, as we speak, we've got a two-person space program called Gemini. We also have a program called Apollo, which is our moonshot, being managed by a good old American named Werner von Braun. I was a big fan of his work in the war. Yeah, exactly. As you know, he had a movie called I Aim for the Stars, but sometimes I hit London. Apollo's actually launched twice now. An Apollo probe has gone around the Earth twice. It's very exciting. On the biggest rocket we've ever seen, called the Saturn. So in a few years, we're going to put someone on the moon. That is, if the Russians don't beat us first. We actually, after 9 tries, got a probe to hit the moon. You think it wouldn't be that hard, it's right there. But it's actually a complicated piece of orbital mechanics. It was not until Ranger 7. Congress was talking about cutting funding the whole time because we could not hit the moon, or at least with the camera on. Ranger 7 finally made it to the moon, took pictures all the way down, and then died because that's what happens when you hit the moon really fast. We've got our first communication satellites. You can watch the Olympics live from Japan as they happen.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Via satellite. I cannot overstate the impact. You can watch soccer games from Europe now as they happen, if you like soccer. They call it football over there? Football. So yeah, space is really exciting right now, but we don't know what's happening next. We don't know if the Russians have some sort of space spectacular lined up to beat us.
It's kind of scary. I mean, the Russians, I know we signed the nuclear test ban treaty last year, but even so, this is a tense time.
How many of you lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis? All of you, right? It was just 2 years ago. How can you not remember the Cuban Missile Crisis?
I'm 1 year old.
You're 1 year old?
Yeah.
You're very articulate for 1 year old. I'm impressed. You're definitely going to win a prize if you can read at 1 year old. Yeah, 2 years ago, the world almost came to nuclear annihilation. I cannot overstate how much that is just a concept that just suffuses our mentality, even more than this thing they're talking about where we're pumping carbon dioxide into the air, and there's this concern that in, say, 50 years, the temperature of the Earth is going to go up by a couple of degrees. I'm sure they're completely wrong, and scientists don't know what they're talking
Isaac
about.
Asimov wrote a whole really good article about this greenhouse effect thing.
Right, we could end up like
I found
Venus.
these results.
Doomsday Clock.
Your computer is talking to us.
Ah, where did that come from?
Hello, Agnes. All right, we have time for one more question, and then the prizes come out. Last question. You, sir.
Are you happy being in 1964?
Am I happy? That's an excellent question, right? And I'm going to turn that around and say, is there anyone here who, if you could be a millionaire in 1964, would you trade your existence in 2019 and go back to 1964? Is there anyone in this room who would? No one.
Would you raise your hand? Honestly, raise your hand. I mean, assuming you could bring
You're
your
the
friends and
right
family
color
with
for
you
it.
or whatever you want to do. Right.
Right.
Would you go live that life? I mean, setting aside because there's like family and things like that. Would you live that life? No internet. You know, just no internet, just by itself.
You don't have to worry about the eye.
Pollution,
Cigarettes,
widespread
everywhere.
pollution, the fear of nuclear war,
Yeah.
rampant open racism, bigotry, chauvinism. The answer is, I do enjoy living in 1964, but I don't have to stay there. Even being Jewish can be difficult. There are neighborhoods that are redlined from Jews living there. It's only recently, they had to kill 6 million of us to feel guilty about it. So the answer is, I enjoy living in 1964 because I have to, and I live day by day, and I find the things that are exciting and interesting. And the nice thing is that I can bring it to you and say, look at these cool things you might have forgotten. There's amazing things. For instance, one of the things we've done is, in my readings, I've found 14 amazing stories written by women, science fiction writers, from the late 50s, early 60s. These are fantastic stories by authors you have probably never heard of. And these are timeless stories. And this is what happens. 55 years goes by and you forget all the neat stuff that happened. So the answer is, I love living in 1964 and discovering great stuff and bringing it to you. But at the same time, I've asked my wife is, would you like to stay here forever? Even if we were millionaires, even if we could live in Amos Burke's mansion and have a swimming pool.
For me, no way. No way. Not the way women were treated back then, and not the way life worked back then. It's not even just the internet. There's no way I would live back then.
How many people here are under 25, male and under 25? So if you lived back then, you would be subject to the draft. Even before Vietnam came out, people would have to be drafted to Lebanon or Germany or Laos, all these places around the world. And now there is real fighting happening in Vietnam, and the real possibility that American soldiers are going to be putting feet on the ground in this I mean, what are we defending in Vietnam? We've got this corrupt dictatorship there with revolving door colonels doing a coup almost. There was a coup just the other day, and they were cooing people who had cooed just a few months ago. I mean, why are we there? And the answer is we put so much money into it, we don't want to back down now because we're scared of communism beating us, whatever that means. I mean, not to sound like, some pinko, hippie student or something, but, those are my sentiments. All right, so the following people are going to get prizes. You in the back, you, of course. Who's number 3?
This gentleman right here, right?
The man from the future, the man who knows everything before I do. He's angling for a job. All right, so let me show you what I got for you. So,
but before we do that, did you want to explain what the books are?
Oh, that's right. So if any of you are interested in these, so these are amazing. We just became a publishing company just so we could release this book.
Yeah.
And we are selling signed copies at the end of this panel. If you like what we do, if you enjoyed this show,
our shows are free. The blog is the fanzine is free. We don't make any money off it. We don't have a Patreon or anything like that. But bringing these stories together was a labor of love. It is an amazing book, and it is amazingly resonant today. You've heard of Ursula K. Le Guin, you've heard of James Tiptree Jr., you've heard of Anne McCaffrey. These are authors you have never heard of, and they are worth reading. You may not have heard of Kit Reed, or Pauline Ashwell, or Rosa George Brown, and believe me, they have something to say, and it's worth listening to what they have to say.
and we'll sign the copies too.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. So, but we put these together, and it's worth supporting us and worth reading the stories.
But first off, I'm going to give gifts away. So these are 3 books that have come out recently, and interestingly enough, they all deal with nuclear catastrophe. Now, what's really cool is I did a show a few years ago, which is where I met the lady with the ears, and I gave her a collection of stories, which she read, and like a week later, she's like, "This was really good." And I was like, "I got someone in this old science fiction." So I'm going to try to do that today too. So first off, we have a Canticle for Leibowitz. And this is an interesting story about the cyclical nature of, it starts with a nuclear bomb, and then Catholic monks basically bringing back civilization. It's like a modern day Renaissance.
Is that the Asian edition? Thank you.
You are welcome. All right. This is an interesting book. It's all about 2 guys, 2 girls who are whisked away to another planet and then evaluated for their ability to survive. This is actually quite a neat book. This is a really interesting book about what might happen if we're putting too many nukes into the air. In 1980, suddenly, all mammals lose the ability to have children.
Oh, is it Graveyard?
Yeah, and this is a story that takes place in 2029, after almost everyone is dead. It's told from the point of view of one of the youngest people still alive. He's in his 50s. This is a really neat book. And it's British and it has that contemplative.
We are down to the last minute here. It is 12:59. So we're going to step outside.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I probably need this room. But come up and see us, get a card for our fanzine, our online fanzine, or come check out the book, take a look at it, because it's worth a look. And come talk to us and ask us more questions, because we love to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.
So,
I haven't seen it. I've not heard of that.
Wow.
you can actually